My name is John Levy. It's my distinct privilege to continue to serve as the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation. And on behalf of our outstanding LSC board, most of whom are here with us tonight, I welcome you to this remarkable forum on increasing access to justice. It's so great to see so many of you here after what has been now nearly 4 years, a COVID hiatus, in having an in-person forum here in the nation's capital. Thank you to Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, co-chair of the Congressional Access to Legal Aid Caucus, for arranging our use of this special auditorium. We will be privileged to hear from her and 5 of her Capitol Hill colleagues, Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Murphy, Representatives Matt Cartwright, Debbie Dingell, and Kelly Armstrong. And we are so fortunate to be joined by New York Times best-selling author John Grisham, the director of the Justice Department's Office for Access to Justice, Rachel Rossi, and ABA President Deborah Enochs Ross. This program also features 2 extraordinary panels. The Chief Justices from Indiana, Minnesota, Oregon, and Texas traveled here to discuss growing efforts to empower paralegals and other non-lawyer advocates to provide targeted, limited legal services. And our second panel, senior executives from some of America's leading businesses will discuss the importance of closing the justice gap for American business. Well, we hope these discussions today will help develop, refine, or expand new initiatives to address a persistent and pressing problem, the nation's justice gap. Now, really a justice crisis. Convening these forums was something that our LSC board launched a number of years ago in an effort to better educate our fellow countrymen about the significance of this growing crisis. LSC's 2022 Justice Gap Report, released just last April, demonstrated how wide that gap still is, revealing that low-income Americans do not receive any or enough legal help for 92% of their substantial civil legal problems. So unfortunately, despite our best efforts, the crisis in civil legal assistance for low-income Americans is raging on, and the chronic underfunding of LSC and its grantees is helping to fuel the crisis. As grateful as we are that the omnibus spending bill recently passed by Congress increased LSC's funding to $560 million, which was a 14.5% hike, and the president's budget for fiscal year 2024 seeks $800 million in funding for LSC, much more is needed to close this justice gap after years of inadequate support. Folks, in 1994, 29 years ago, Congress appropriated approximately $400 million for LSC. By 2022, LSC's appropriation had increased only slightly to $489 million, not remotely enough to keep up with inflation, much less the increased demand and need for services resulting from recessions, population growth, and the pandemic that have occurred over the last 3 decades. Recognizing the magnitude of that civil justice crisis, the LSC board voted unanimously to seek more than $1.5 billion from Congress for fiscal year 2024. But in addition to pursuing adequate funding, LSC and other stakeholders in the legal aid community have advanced numerous innovative initiatives to make the delivery of legal services more efficient and effective. As we will hear from the distinguished Chief Justices today, courts in a number of states are easing bar rules, adopting other regulatory reforms to make it possible for non-lawyers to provide some forms of legal assistance. Legal tech companies are harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and other innovations to help self-represented litigants navigate the court system. Many of these new tools are funded by LSC's Technology Initiative grants and were displayed at our annual Innovations in Tech conference held just a few months ago. And we're so grateful that the ABA continues to foster advances in pro bono assistance, including its highly successful Free Legal Answers program, which is expanding its capacity. And throughout the past decade, LSC has highlighted civil legal aid issues, proposed solutions and best practices for the field through a series of wide-ranging task forces. And spreading our message beyond the legal aid community has also been an important goal. Through forums like these, the growth of our extraordinary podcast, Talk Justice, and the work of our leaders and Emerging Leaders Council, many of you are here tonight, we're able to educate many more outside the field about the gravity of the crisis and what it means for our country. The civil legal aid community may be short of funds, but there's no lack of imagination, determination, and just old-fashioned grit. More than 50 years ago, the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, Donald Rumsfeld, called for the federal funding of civil legal aid with the observation that, quote, "We cannot expect for the rule of law if we as public officials do not assure access to the legal process. To fail to do so would break faith with those Americans, rich and poor alike, who have confidence in our legal institutions and the notion that disputes are better resolved in courtrooms than on our street corners," unquote. Well, much is at stake in this struggle to expand access to justice. As former Pepperdine Law Dean and 10th Circuit Judge Danelle Taha made clear in a rousing call to action at an LSC forum several years ago, and I quote the Dean, "When the great majority of the individuals and small businesses of the nation no longer can, or believe they no longer can, get a lawyer, be represented effectively, go to court, settle their disputes in a fair and impartial way, and be treated like every other citizen, we quite simply have lost the guiding principle of our republic, equal justice under law. When that goes, the rule of law goes. And when that goes, the great dreams of those patriots who founded and fought for this republic go with it, never to be reclaimed. Something must be done," unquote. So let's together join and resolve that we will make LSC's 50th anniversary just next year the time when we get it done, when we live up to the promise of America to realize what Thomas Jefferson called the most sacred of the duties of government, to provide equal and impartial justice to all of its citizens. Thank you very much. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who represents Michigan's 12th District since 2015. How wonderful to see you again, Congresswoman Dingell, and she is a force. She was one of the founders of the Congressional Access to Civil Legal Aid Caucus. She's been a frequent speaker at our events here in Washington and Ann Arbor. She serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, the House Committee on Natural Resources. She co-chairs the bipartisan working group to end domestic violence, as well as the Medicare for All caucus. She is a dedicated advocate for women and founded the National Women's Health Resource Center and the Children's Inn at the National Institutes of Health. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Debbie Dingell.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Washington. And it's wonderful to be here with my friend John, who I have not seen since we were honorary chairs of the Michigan football team, which Jim, by the way, I am honored. Mary Gay is the lawyer. I'm the advocate. I do what she tells me and John tells me to do. I wish I had a law degree, but Jim Harbaugh is actually the one that came. I'm going to tell you the truth. I do care deeply about this, and Jim knows it. But he came into my office and said, I just told John you would be the founding co-chair, and I do whatever Jim Harbaugh tells me to do. I only wish the Michigan football team would listen a little more some days. But I want to say, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be here with Mary Gay Scanlon, who is just one of the consciences of the House and does so much. But you know, when Jim Harbaugh came into my office and introduced us and first talked about this, I said, of course I will, because I know how important it is that people have access to legal counsel. And there are too many people across this country that don't have a level playing field. They can't afford access, they can't find a lawyer. And you know, people, it's all kinds of things. I am someone who has been an advocate for domestic abuse for all my life, because I unfortunately grew up in a home where everybody looks at somebody like me and thinks it doesn't happen in homes like mine. And hey, I was a kid. The police didn't even listen to you. I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. And in those days, hey, her father's somebody. I've worked with a lot of women who can't afford a lawyer, who think they have no recourse but to stay in a situation because they can't protect their kids and they can't find somebody to help them. I've had people that are disabled being evicted from the homes as we're leaving, this quote, we supposedly are leaving the public health crisis in May when the public health expires. People whose water is being turned off now because they can't afford the water, let alone men and women who have been accused of crimes that have nobody that is going to help them. And in my district in Michigan, which is now the 6th after redistricting, the 6th district, I work hand in hand. The casework that I do, if I didn't have the legal services there, they help. They're there. They're the extra hand. I will call and say, I got somebody who needs somebody. And you know what? The pandemic has led to a dearth of people being there to help. We're not putting the money into this that we need to. And all of you and your concern and your investment give us hope. So I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for being here. I'm here to just support you. We'll keep doing what you tell us to do, John. And I also have to, when John Grisham sat next to me, I thought, okay, what member is he? I know him from somewhere. He's my favorite author. Every time, I've already pre-ordered. So I can't tell you how great it is to be with all of you, but from Mary Gay, we'll talk about this too. You all are the heroes. We're here to make sure you can do your job and get more to help you do your job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Dingell, for joining us and for those wonderful remarks. My name's Abigail Kuzma, and I serve on the LSC's Board of Directors. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon. She serves as co-chair of the Congressional Access to Legal Aid Caucus. She represents Pennsylvania's 5th District and serves on the House Judiciary and Rules Committees. She's a frequent speaker at LSC events and an unwavering advocate for legal services organizations and their low-income clients. Last year, she and her fellow caucus co-chair, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, penned an op-ed for the need for Congress to step up funding for LSC. She is co-lead on the House Dear Colleague letter, which is critically important. Thank you so much for joining us today, Congresswoman Scanlon.
Thank you, and I'm honored to be with you all today, and thank you to Debbie for starting this caucus so I could just step into it and follow along in the great path that has been forged already. I'm really sorry that I can't stay for the next session. I really would like to hear more about what we can do to use folks who are not lawyers to help access justice, access the legal services that we need. And I would invite you to educate me on what kind of federal laws we might pass to help facilitate that. As a former Legal Services Board member in Philadelphia and now co-chair of the Bipartisan Access to Legal Aid Caucus, I'm grateful for the advocacy that all of you and your colleagues are doing on behalf of legal services. And I really wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come to the Hill and speak to my colleagues about the importance of legal services, not just the importance to the individual clients, but the importance to our communities and to the actual functioning of a civil society. Your convening at the Capitol brings a gravitas to this discussion, and it's more difficult to ignore. And you also have compelling stories to tell. You all know how important the work of legal services is and how grossly underfunded LSC is. You know that access to justice is not now a reality in this country and that the justice gap is continuing to grow while LSC funding has remained stagnant. But many of my colleagues do not know that. They know that there's always a line item in the budget, and they think that they're doing their job just by approving what's there without much in the way of an increase. But you can draw their attention to that. Legal aid benefits constituents in every member's district. So please try to draw those local connections when you speak to the members or their staffs, whether that connection is about benefits to seniors or veterans or children with disabilities or families who could be illegally evicted. We know that legal aid has the capacity to change lives. And for too long, we've been severely underfunding these critical programs. I was talking with some of the judges about how useful it's been as legal services agencies have put together studies that show the return on investment. I mean, if we're not going to do it for the right reason, let's make the economic argument at every chance that we get. But that's why in my time in Congress, I've been advocating for more funding, trying to educate my colleagues on what more we can do and why we should do it. I've also worked to develop some tools so that other representatives can better integrate legal services into their constituent casework. It's all representing the same people, whether it's casework or legal aid. It's the same issues, but we attack it from different ways, and by leveraging each group's strengths, we can do more, I think. So if any of the offices that you meet with this week seem receptive, please tell them about the training module that my office has put together to help constituent services staff. And when we run these training sessions, we do it every other year in my office, and we invite in both the other congressional members, staffs in our region, and our state representatives, because they do constituent services as well. But so we explain to them, where they can leverage each other's strengths, how, legal aid often acts as an early warning system when there's something amiss in the system, and that can lead to legislative action. So trying to develop those relationships and in the process show just how important legal services are and perhaps why they should be better funded. So please let me know how my office or I can be helpful, or if we can follow up with anyone that you meet with during this week. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Scanlon, for those remarks and for all of the good work you do for Legal Service Corporation. My name is Frank Nooner, and I'm a member of the LSC Board. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, best-selling author and attorney John Grisham. John is a prominent advocate for criminal justice reform, frequently speaking publicly on the issue of wrongful convictions and serving on the board for the Innocence Project and Centurion Ministries. He also advocates for the importance of civil legal aid. He serves on LSC's Leaders Council, which works to raise public awareness of the current crisis in civil justice, and he has previously spoken at LSC events. And if you've read any of his 47 consecutive #1 bestsellers, you know that access to justice is a major theme in his works. His books frequently demonstrate how poverty impacts a person's ability to receive a fair shake from the legal system. In his 2020 thriller, A Time for Mercy, a woman whose son stands accused of murder tells his court-appointed lawyer about the daily struggles her family faces, struggles that we are familiar with, that are familiar to so many low-income Americans. The mother says, "It's awful. You work hard at a crap job. When you finally get paid, there's a yellow notice in the envelope. Some credit card company or finance company or crooked used car dealer has snagged your paycheck and cut it in half. It's just awful. That's the way I live, Jake. Always climbing a mountain, trying to keep food on the table, and there's always somebody after me. Writing mean letters, hiring collection lawyers, threatening. Somebody's always threatening. I don't mind working hard, but I'm just trying to stay afloat, to survive. I can't even think about getting ahead." John is a 2-time winner of the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction and was honored with the Library of Congress Creative Achievement Award for Fiction. Thank you so much, John, for taking the time to be with us and for your support of Legal Service Corporation. Join me now in welcoming John Grisham.
Thank you, Frank, for that very generous introduction. I forgot who wrote that stuff. It's been several books back, but thank you for reading that. Thanks also to John Levy for the invitation to be here. John has asked me to be here before. It's always, when he calls, I always say, I'm not going to do it. Whatever he wants me to do, I'm not going to do it. Okay, I'm not going to say yes to John, and I always show up. It's very hard to say no to John Levy. We go back some 15 years when we met each other, working on a case for a young man in Oklahoma. His name is Tommy. That's all I'll say. Tommy was wrongfully convicted when he was a young man, very young, for a murder he knew nothing about. And he is from Ada, Oklahoma, and during the mid-1980s in Ada, there were 6 wrongful convictions in a 5-year period, all caused by the same cops, the same prosecutor, the same authorities. And of those 6 men, 4 received the death penalty, including Tommy initially got the death penalty. All 5 have been exonerated. They're all out, except for Tommy. I wrote about him. There was a wonderful Netflix documentary about Tommy's case. We have successfully brought a lot of attention to the case, and John Levy brought the incredible talents and assets and facilities of his law firm to the table. And the legal work has been brilliant and timely, and we continue to do so, but we just can't get him out. He's been there for 38 years. He went in when he was 20, and we're still fighting away. Sometimes we wonder, is he ever going to get out? But we're still fighting. So John, I've known John for a long time now. We've had a lot of wonderful conversations. He called in 2009 to tell me he had just been nominated by President Obama to chair the Legal Services Corporation. And I said, I thought you guys were friends. What kind of appointment is that? And he said, no, I'm very excited about it. John, as you know, goes way back with Barack Obama because Barack, as a Harvard law student, interned in Sidley Austin's office in Chicago, I think 1988, 1989. At the time, there was a young associate at Sidley named Michelle Robinson, first-year associate, and she met Barack in the offices there in Chicago. John Levy claims he made the introduction, which he probably did. But I've met other Sidley lawyers over the years, and they all claim to have made the introduction, so you don't know who to believe. As senior partner, though, John gets to claim authority for the introductions. He's the top man, but he was very excited about the job. He called a few years later when the next administration came in and said, well, we got some bad news. We've seen our budget for next year. It is zero. No funding for legal aid. He said, I'm finally out of work. I've got to find another job or go back to Chicago. But John typically rolled up his sleeves, went to work, kept legal aid afloat, the LSC, and not only kept the budget, but got an increase every year since he has been the chairman. So it's remarkable what he has done in his present position. I asked him a while ago, is he ever going to get rid of the job? And he says he has a plan, but typical John, he loves what he does. I learned a long time ago he has a passion for fairness, equality, and justice, and a really, really nasty distaste for injustice. It's just not fair, and he doesn't like it. He keeps fighting. I have a long affinity with legal aid because it goes back to when I finished law school at Ole Miss some 42 years ago. I inadvertently became a legal aid lawyer. I didn't have a job, and I went back to my hometown, small town in Mississippi, without a job. I wasn't worried about that. There were plenty of lawyers in town, but most of them were not very good, and I didn't want to join their firms. So I borrowed $1,000 from my father. I found this tiny office space. I put my name on the door, I hung out my shingle, and I declared myself ready to sue. I was, the new hired gun in town with no clients. And that should be against the law in every state. You should not be allowed to do that. You should have to intern somewhere and work and learn something before you go out and force yourself on the public. I had no clients for a long time, or a few. Back in those days, it's probably the same way now. When a new lawyer came to town, the old lawyers, of course, would push all the crap in his direction. All the crazy cases, and every town's got crazy people who want to sue everybody. All the bizarre people who hang around law offices, they all come to see the new guy. And I was kind of working my way through all the nut jobs, local nut jobs in town, when one day a lady came in, and she was in tears. And she had a piece of paper, and she was holding it, and she was very upset. I looked at it. It was an eviction notice. And her name was Irene, and she said, I got to talk to somebody. They're about to kick me out of my trailer. She lived in a part of town, at the edge of town, that was not that nice. It was mainly trailers, mobile homes. I knew the area well. There are a lot of those in the Deep South. And she had been there for a long time. These are the working poor. They all had jobs, 2 or 3 jobs, part-time jobs, low-wage jobs, but the people worked. And they registered, they voted, they were, they tried their best, but it was hard to get ahead where they lived. And she was being evicted. And she said, I got to talk to you. And I said, well, the lady was in tears. I said, sure, let's talk. So I made a pot of coffee. I had nothing else to do. So we sat down, we talked for a long time, and she told me her story of the landlord, the slumlord, the guy who owned all these trailers, was a notorious character in town and not very well regarded. And she said, I can't lose my trailer. I've been there for years. I'm behind on the rent, but I always catch up. And I can't, you got to stop it. Court was that afternoon at 3 o'clock. City court was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that day. And I said, I had great sympathy for her. I couldn't just, make her go away. I said, okay, I'll be there. I'll come to court. We'll get through this. And she left me her eviction notice, and she left the 2-page lease that the slumlord had put together for all of his tenants. And I flipped through it, and I realized the guy had made a fatal mistake. It was a 30-day notice was required before we could evict anybody, and only 24 days had run. The guy had gotten in a hurry, and we had him dead cold, okay? So I went to court, and as I walked in the courtroom, I realized there were quite a few people there. Word had spread that she had a lawyer. There were 3 other people being evicted at the same time, her neighbors, and she introduced me to them outside the courtroom and said, "Would you be their lawyer too?" And I said, "Why not? You know, why not? I'm getting paid. Why not? I'll do all 4 of them." So they called the case, and the slumlord walks up, tough guy, and I walked up to the courtroom. The judge was a lawyer down the street, part-time city judge. Back then, we had to kind of pass the robe around every few months. Everybody had to serve as judge. I knew the guy well. He called the case, and we walked up, and the slumlord saw Irene walk up with a lawyer, me. And the guy was, you know, obviously surprised to see one of his tenants with a real lawyer. And we started arguing the case, and I said, "Judge, there's a fatal mistake here. He has not waited 30 days. We showed the paperwork. It was clear. There was no doubt about it. And the courtroom was kind of crowded with her neighbors, and I said, "Furthermore, Judge, this lease is defective. The property is in bad shape. I'm going to file a lawsuit tomorrow in county court suing this guy for $10,000 for damages and another $10,000 for punitive, just for the hell of it." And I made a big deal, a $20,000 lawsuit. The trailer wasn't worth $10,000, but it was a big deal, and people really, you know, thought that was exciting. The judge dismissed all 4 eviction notices. We all left in triumphant, and the next morning I had more clients than I could ever dream of. Word spread that this guy would take your case for free, wouldn't charge you anything. So I had clients coming by for every kind of legal problem you can imagine, and most of them needed help. It was a collection of, you know, bad debt collection, hospital bills, garnishments, the stuff Frank read a while ago that all comes from real life experiences. And although I had plenty of clients, I was getting further and further behind with my bills. Luckily, about a year later, it was terrible fortune, but there was a horrible car crash, and 2 people were killed, and they lived in the trailer park. And I managed to fight off all the ambulance chasers and keep the case. The driver who caused the wreck was intoxicated, driving a company vehicle. There was a ton of insurance, and we settled the case quickly. They started calling me Lawyer Bono. That was my nickname around the trailer park, Lawyer Bono. They didn't know what pro bono. I had to explain what pro bono meant, but they knew it was free. That's all they cared about, and so I was Lawyer Bono, and that reputation spread. But when I settled a car wreck, Lawyer Bono finally got paid. And a few years later, when I ran for office to the state legislature in Mississippi, I campaigned in the trailer park, and there were, you know, Grisham signs everywhere, and we got a lot of votes out of the trailer park, and I won the election. That case proved to me, though, the power of a license to practice law when it's used to help people. It's astonishing what happens when you're a lawyer and you take a case, a person who cannot afford to pay you, or somebody who's not supposed to have a lawyer, and you pick up the phone, or you show up at court with them, and everything changes. The whole game changes. Suddenly they have respect, they get a fair hearing. There aren't enough of us doing that, even back then. We didn't have a good legal aid system back then. But the power of a law license is incredible when it's used to help people. For that reason, I've always been involved in legal aid. After about 10 years of practicing law, I changed careers and I started writing books, and I didn't have to practice law anymore. But I always had this affinity for legal aid. And we moved to Charlottesville about 30 years ago, and we're blessed in Charlottesville to have a very, very strong, active legal aid group, the Legal Aid Justice Center, LAJC. It's a bunch of lawyers who are really protective of clients and looking for bad behavior from corporations, from bad guys, from governmental agencies. As an example, during COVID, so many people were out of work. People could not get their benefits. They needed to buy food and pay rent and pay car notes and mortgages and take care of their kids. People were losing all those things. They were losing children because they couldn't pay child support because the benefits were tied up in the bureaucracy. The state's computer system is horribly outdated. There were not enough people to process the claims. And our legal aid filed a $1 billion lawsuit. There were $1 billion in the system. And a federal judge got mad, threw the book at the state, the money got released, and 180,000 Virginians got their unemployment benefits almost overnight because of legal aid. That's the type of stuff our legal aid system does. They just, thank you, they just closed down an ICE detention center in Farmville, Virginia. It was grossly overcrowded. Nobody was convicted of a crime there. These were not criminals, they were migrants, undocumented workers trying to get in, and legal aid took them to court. Our biggest victory a few years ago was a class action lawsuit filed against the state of Virginia. Virginia, like 43 other states, if you get court fines and court costs for whatever your crime is, they yank your driver's license as punishment. Isn't that brilliant, to make matters even worse? And the LAJC said this is unconstitutional, took it to court, fought it in federal court for a few years, and won a landmark decision that said this is unconstitutional. That's the kind of legal aid we have in Central Virginia. It's very active, it's very effective, and it's always looking for a fight. And I'm happy to support that. I've supported financially. My wife and I enjoy doing events for legal aid. We're always there supporting people like you who are doing God's work. Thank you. My time's up.
Thank you, Lawyer Bono. We're always honored to have you speak to LSC events and entertained as well. I'm Lori Mikva, member of the LSC's Board of Directors. It's my honor to introduce the Director of DOJ's Office for Access to Justice, Rachel Rossi. Director Rossi was appointed to her position in May of 2022. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Associate Attorney General in the Office of the Associate Attorney General. She was also the inaugural anti-hate coordinator for the Justice Department. She began her career as Los Angeles County Public Defender and remains focused to this day on expanding access to justice for low Americans. Thank you for speaking to us today, Director Rossi.
Thank you, Lori, for that warm introduction, and just deep gratitude to LSC for your ongoing partnership and for hosting this incredibly important event today. It truly is an honor to join all of you in this room, many who have dedicated your work and your careers to increasing access to justice for people across our country. The Office for Access to Justice at the Department of Justice works to make the promise of equal justice real for everyone. We lead a whole-of-government approach to expanding and modernizing the Department of Justice's access to justice function, and we work to close justice gaps both in the criminal and civil legal systems. I was honored to be appointed the director of ATJ last summer, and as Lori mentioned, I'm a former public defender myself, and I have seen firsthand the devastation of the access to justice gap. This is a cause that I care deeply about. Our mission at the Office for Access to Justice is to engage in the bold, transformative, and systemic work necessary to ensure that all communities have access to the promises and protections of our legal systems. Oftentimes, that means lifting up the kind of exciting work that you in this room have been leading for many years. Many of the folks in this room today have championed efforts to mitigate barriers to access through legislation, through advocacy, through funding, and through broad efforts to expand the provision of legal services across the country. As we pursue our mission at the Office for Access to Justice, our work is guided by three main principles. First, increasing access. We work to break down barriers to access by expanding the availability of civil legal assistance and by supporting public defense, including cutting-edge approaches like expanding non-lawyer assistance that I know Chief Justices from Indiana, Minnesota, Oregon, and Texas will be discussing during this forum. We are also committed to eliminating barriers that exclude people based on economic status, race, identity, language, or disability. Our second principle is accelerating innovation. We work to use research, data, and innovative strategies to improve the fairness and efficiency in our legal systems. And internally, we work to ensure that DOJ services and programs incorporate modern, evidence-based practices to further equal access to justice. I'm also excited to hear about the panel today of private sector partners about the role that corporations might play in this effort. And third, we work to safeguard integrity. That means that we promote the accountability and the integrity of our legal systems through systemic and transformational reform. When pursuing equal access to justice for all, it is important to expand access to legal systems, but it's also important to reform the systems themselves to root out systemic inequities. So we are a new office, but we've been hard at work already, listening to advocates, identifying priorities, and building a strong staff with the experience and abilities that we need to make a true difference. Just in the last couple of weeks, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright, the Supreme Court case that guaranteed the right to a public defender in a felony case. We conducted our first National Public Defense Day tour. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco joined me in Miami, Florida to launch this tour, and we also traveled to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to the Muskogee Creek Nation, to Las Vegas, Nevada, to Nashville, Tennessee, and to Des Moines, Iowa. We were joined by other Justice Department officials, and we were exploring the state of public defense and meeting with public defenders on the ground, hearing about the work that they were doing. We then concluded the week with a celebration at the Department of Justice where Attorney General Garland, Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, Federal Defender Jubal Scott, and I provided remarks. It was truly a moving event. We had Mr. Clarence Gideon's original handwritten petition to the U.S. Supreme Court on display, guarded very carefully by the National Archives. And we were able to be joined by Abe Crash, the last living attorney who argued on behalf of Mr. Gideon. In collaboration with LSC and many other partners in this room, we're also supporting access to counsel and legal assistance in civil proceedings. We moved the federal government pro bono program into the Office for Access to Justice, and we expanded its resources for the first time in over 20 years by adding a second attorney to expand the program's reach. This expansion will allow ATJ to create pathways for thousands of federal attorneys to volunteer to help fill the justice gap through pro bono. In September last year, we were also pleased to host for the first time a convening of almost all of the 132 executive directors of the LSC grantee organizations from across the country at the Justice Department with Attorney General Garland and Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta. Our office also directs and staffs the work of the Legal Aid Interagency Roundtable. This is a collaboration of over 28 federal agencies, co-chaired by the Attorney General and White House Counsel's Office. Access to Justice organized the Roundtable's first principals convening in 2021 and issued the 2021 report, Access to Justice in the Age of COVID-19. Just last Tuesday, the Roundtable released its 2022 report, Access to Justice Through Simplification, a roadmap for people-centered simplification of federal government forms, processes, and language. The roadmap in that report was built upon the insights and experiences of the 28 agencies and highlights best practices for federal government to simplify forms, processes, and language in order to expand access to federal programs and services that we know have lasting impacts on people's lives. Most importantly, the Roundtable's work and report of 2022 reflects a people-centered approach to access to justice. We engaged with over 70 state and local legal aid and advocacy organizations about the top federal forms and processes where simplification might significantly reduce the need for their clients to seek legal assistance to access benefits, services, programs, or resolve disputes. Specifically, the 2022 Roundtable report provides a roadmap with 3 key steps that federal agencies and other organizations can take to model this type of work and simplify and improve processes for legal system users. First, understand the barriers to access through meaningful engagement with the communities we serve and the impacted government programs. Second, implement strategies through incorporating that feedback from the engagement conducted. And third, evaluate the impact of the simplification efforts to determine if they have meaningfully expanded access or if further improvements are possible. The report also highlights the potential promise of non-lawyer assistance to help close the justice gap, particularly for marginalized and underserved communities. It showcases the efforts of AmeriCorps, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Social Security Administration, the Department of Defense, the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, and others to create opportunities for non-lawyers to provide assistance, including legal navigators and accredited representatives. It also highlights an LSC-funded grant to the Michigan Advisory Program, Advocacy Program, to create a legal navigator online program that engages non-attorney administrative volunteers to address the burdensome administrative tasks required to apply for criminal record expungements. We have been incredibly fortunate to have LSC and Ron Flagg as members of the roundtable, demonstrating leadership in this work across the federal government and participating in the 2022 Principals Convening and Report. So despite our tremendous progress at the Office for Access to Justice, we know that there is much more to do. I don't need to tell this room about LSC's Justice Gap Study, showing that 92% of low-income Americans' legal needs simply go unmet each year. In real life terms, we know that this means too many people simply cannot get help for basic human needs: secure housing, custody of their children, safety from domestic violence, employment, essential assistance with probate, freedom from consumer debt. The intersectional complexities of these harms often cause a downward spiral of additional legal challenges, as all of you know very well. For our office to be impactful and to embed access to justice as a core element of federal government, we need your partnership and support. I'm really excited to hear about the ideas and recommendations that will come from this forum and that will carry forward because of your leadership. So let me thank you again for the opportunity to share just a few of the items of work that our office is doing, and thank you for our shared commitment to access to justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel Rossi, and thank you to the Justice Department for its incredible support of the work that the Legal Services Corporation does. My name is Father Pius Petrick. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of the Legal Services Corporation, and I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Congressman Matt Cartwright. Congressman Cartwright has represented the 8th District of Pennsylvania. We've got a lot of good Pennsylvania representation today. Since 2013, 10 years this year, he's the ranking member of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee, and officers on the Financial Services, and especially important for us, the General Government Appropriations Subcommittee. And we are extraordinarily grateful to that committee and to Congressman Cartwright, who helped lead the way in securing the largest funding increase in LSC's history for fiscal year 2023. That's, I think, why you have the Vice Chairman introducing you. If you had gotten $1 billion for us, you would have gotten the Chairman introducing you. But nonetheless, we appreciate you joining us today, Congressman Cartwright.
Thank you, Father Pius, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. By a show of hands, can I ask how many here have law degrees? Good, excellent. We're in good company then. It's good. You are here at the home of the greatest lawyer in American history, Daniel Webster. Spent most of his life here. Came to Congress and started in 1813, exactly 200 years before I came to Congress, and started off in the House of Representatives. Then in 1817, he went back to practice and really argued the most consequential cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. The Dartmouth College case, Gibbons versus Ogden, McCullough versus Maryland, and they quoted his arguments in their opinion. So influential he was. But I asked you if you're lawyers because I am too, and I'm awfully proud to be a lawyer here in this land of laws that we call America. Webster said, "The law, it has honored us, let us honor it." And he said, "I invoke those who fill the seats of justice and all who minister before her altar to execute the wholesome and necessary severity of the law." That's what Webster said about the law. And I want to talk to you about legal services this afternoon because it is true that the law can be severe if you're on the wrong end of it, criminal or civil. And it is true, as Director Rossi just told you, that there are nowhere near enough of the people who minister before the altar of justice to take care of the people who need their help. And that's why I am a fulsome supporter of the Legal Services Corporation. My wife is also a lawyer. Marion Munley is her name, in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We started a legal services clinic, the two of us did, and we opened it up in a neck of the woods that it's called the Back Mountain in northeastern Pennsylvania, and it's thought by most to be a fairly affluent area, pretty well-off group of residents there. But one thing you find out when you open up a legal clinic in a place that you think is affluent, poverty doesn't come out and show itself. We saw cases that were heartbreaking. I had a woman come in one night, and her husband had just died. And she was a nurse. He died of cancer. It took him well nigh 3 years to pass away. And she nursed him in his illness and through his end. So she wasn't working, and he wasn't working, and they had nothing coming in. And what did they live on? They lived on credit cards for close to 3 years, buying groceries, paying for the heat. And they racked up, obviously, an enormous credit card debt. Actually, it wasn't as enormous as it would have been if it had been I spending the money, but it was about $60,000 in credit card debt that they racked up on groceries. And she came in and she was being sued by one of these companies that buys up credit card debt. And you know that they don't buy these cases one at a time. They buy tractor-trailer loads full of files of these cases, and they're all on assignment from the original creditor to the debt collection company that is now the plaintiff. And I said, well, let me see the complaint. She handed over the complaint, and you know what I was looking for. I was looking for the written assignment of rights, which in Pennsylvania, at least, was a requisite element of the complaint of such a thing. And I looked at it, and it wasn't there. And we went to court in Tunkhannock, Wyoming County, Pennsylvania, and I made my argument, and the necessary severity of the law prevailed, and we got her out of that debt. And that's the kind of thing, Father Pius, that floats my boat. And that's the kind of thing that makes me want to support Legal Services Corporation. And that's the kind of thing that made me want to run for public office, to achieve that kind of justice, to achieve that kind of thing for people who need it. You know, because if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't looked at that complaint, if somebody with a trained eye hadn't seen what was going on there, she would have been stuck. She would have lost her house. And that's why, as chairman of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee of Appropriations, I'm very proud to tell you about the progression of funding we have given to the Legal Services Corporation over the last 10 years, which is my tenure in the Congress. In 2013 fiscal year, $341 million was the figure for LSC. The next year it went up to $365 million. The next year, 2015, $375 million. 2016, $385 million. Stayed the same in 2017, flat at $385 million. 2018 fiscal year, $410 million. 2019, $415 million. 2020, $440 million, plus $50 million in pandemic relief funding. In 2021 fiscal year, $456 million. And then when I took over as chairman, I upped that to $489 million in fiscal year 2022, plus $40 million in disaster relief funding. And then last year, the capper, we went from $489 million to $560 million for fiscal year 2023, plus $20 million more in disaster relief funding. This is a nation of laws, and the way to keep the laws from being perverted, from being used in the wrong way, is to make sure that people have access to legal services, people who can look at the situation and assess the legal rights and responsibilities of the parties in the correct way. So I'm here to say I'm proud to be a lawyer, and I'm proud to support the Legal Services Corporation. Thank you all for listening.
Daniel Webster's a hard act to follow, but here we are. Thank you, Representative Cartwright, for your remarks today, and more importantly, thank you for your leadership. The numbers you just quoted speak for themselves, and those numbers are not just dollars. Those numbers are people who are represented rather than being unrepresented. Those are people who remain in their homes. Those are people who remain safe from violence in their homes. Those are people who get their veterans benefits. And so we're very grateful for your leadership. Speaking of which, I am surrounded by leaders today, judicial leaders who are really on the front lines of thinking about how to make access to justice a reality in their states and in our country. This is a watershed moment for LSC, and I would say for access to justice. In one sense, it's a watershed moment because this is the first time in 4 years we've been able to meet like this, and the energy that we feel at this moment is real and palpable and different from even all of our effective Zoom programs over the course of the last several years. But this is also a watershed moment because the confluence of COVID and the eviction crisis and the reaction of the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judicial branches to the eviction crisis, which is ongoing, has been a model for all of us. And I think the pandemic has accentuated the need for legal aid and has accentuated the justice gap. We've heard reference to it today several times. Over 90% of the problems faced by low-income Americans, the important, significant civil legal problems, are met with essentially no assistance. And half of the eligible applicants who make it to the door of civil legal aid in America are turned away for lack of resources. So that's a problem, and it's a problem that in the first instance, we in the legal profession think about, and it's a problem that our justice leaders around the country, and we are fortunate to have 4 of them today joining us, are thinking about solving. And one way to solve it is to increase the number of people, the categories of people who can help and provide legal assistance to those in need, and to identify programs in which paraprofessionals and other non-lawyers can help in specified categories of cases, be they housing, eviction, or family cases. Again, we're blessed to have 4 real leaders in this process of thinking about how to expand representation, and I will introduce them from the far end of the table all the way to my neighbor here. At the far end, Lori Gilday is the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. She was appointed to the court in 2006 and has served as Chief Justice since 2010. Next is Nathan Hecht, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas. He has served on the court since 1988 and is the longest-serving member of the court in Texas history and the longest-tenured Texas judge in active service. Next, we have Megan Flynn is the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. She assumed that role on January 1st and has served on the Oregon Supreme Court since 2017. And then next to me is Loretta Rush, the Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court. She joined the court in 2012 and was named Chief Justice in 2014. Chief Justice Rush is also the president of the Conference of Chief Justices, and really that organization is a major and very credible ally of LSC in educating Congress about the importance of civil legal aid. So to start off the conversation, Chief Justice Hecht, let's start with you and kind of set the stage. You've said, quote, "There's just no way in a country like the United States that we can sit by and let so many people in need of access to justice not get it." Can you share your thoughts on what undergirds this belief, and what role the judiciary should play in increasing access to justice for low-income Americans? We often think of or hear that judges are, just calling balls and strikes and not much beyond that.
Well, thanks, Ron, for the invitation to be here, and thanks to John Levy for convening us once again to talk about this crucial subject. We're here, the 4 of us, because we see every day in the stewardship of the legal systems in our state, the justice, not the justice gap, the justice chasm is what it amounts to. Stories like John Grisham tells so powerfully that are playing out in real lives every day in the courts of our states. And so we feel like that it is important not only to the people who are involved, very important to them, of course, their lives are involved, but also important to the integrity of the rule of law, because we can't preside over justice systems where only the rich can get to it. A justice system that serves only the people who can afford it is not justice for all, certainly not justice at all. So that's why it is so important to us that the justice system not just hold the promise of justice to the ear, but deny it to the heart, but that it is real to people who come seeking what they have been promised and are trying to find it in the courthouse. So how do we do that? We have worked very hard to try to engender support from public policymakers like the members of Congress that you just heard from, by legislative officers in our states, to try to make sure that they are aware of the scope of the problem and how they can make meaningful contributions toward fixing it. We have also tried to enlist support from outside the legal community
The congressman had everybody raise your hand if you're a lawyer. I didn't look around to see how many there was. Probably he should ask, raise your hand if you're not a lawyer, and we would have gotten a better feeling for who's in the room. But we're going to hear in a little while from people in the business community who share our concern for better access to justice. We can expand delivery, and so that's what we're mostly here about today, to find ways of making it possible for legal services to be provided even when there's not always an availability of lawyers. Now, truth to tell, we could have done this 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years ago, but we're doing it now. And COVID has provoked us, and we're taking a hard look at all of these systems and operations. And this is an opportunity for us to see that if trained people can bring basic civil legal help to people in ways that close or narrow the gap that we're concerned about, then this will be all to the better. None of us is for dumbed-down justice. None of us is for second-hand, second-tier, shorthand ways of getting through the system. We all want to make sure that the system serves everyone who needs it well. But we're all working on ways where we can do that with people who do not always have law licenses, who can still provide those services. And there's one other thing at stake besides the integrity of the rule of law, and that is public trust and confidence in the courts. Because if they're not there when the people need them, then people lose confidence in the courts. It's no secret that public trust and confidence in the courts is waning. We're way ahead of Congress, no offense, but we see that it's slipping, and it needs to be fortified. We can't talk about decisions. We can't talk about the way the decisions we make in particular cases, but we can make the system run better so that when you need it, it's there. So that's why we think, and truth to tell, Ron, there's 58 of us in the National Conference of Chief Justices. You could put the names in a hat and draw 4 out, and they'd come up here and tell you the same thing that we're going to tell you, because it's not peculiar to our states or to us individually. It's something that the state justice systems share.
I appreciate it, but I still feel we've been lucky. The luck of the draw has been favorable to us today, so we're glad to have all of you. Chief Justice Flynn, responsive to the justice gap and mindful of the consumer protection concerns, if you will, about the quality of service provided, I believe 6 states, including Oregon, have expanded the categories of people who can provide some sort of legal assistance, paraprofessionals, trained paraprofessionals. I should add that 8 other states are in the midst of considering similar changes. Can you tell us about what you're seeing in Oregon? What are the goals and design principles of your licensed paralegal professional program?
Sure, thank you, Ron. Thanks to all the board members who are here for giving us this opportunity to talk about what we're doing. So Oregon is on the verge of launching a paralegal licensing program. Our program is designed to balance the 2 core values of access to justice and consumer protection. We are convinced that allowing limited representation by well-trained paralegals will make legal proceedings more accessible to those low and moderate income Oregonians who currently their only other option is no representation. And we're convinced that we can do this without creating additional risk of harm to those people who are already vulnerable. Because access to justice is our focus, paralegals in Oregon will be licensed, at least initially, to practice only in the areas of family law and landlord-tenant. Those are the areas that we know have the most acute need for legal providers. And it's probably not unique to our state, but we know our numbers in domestic relations. 86% of our cases have at least one party who's self-represented. And in landlord-tenant, in the area of eviction, 97% of our cases have at least one party who's self-represented. In Oregon, the issue of paralegal licensing has largely been driven by our Bar Association, which has spent a lot of time working through and implementing the best way to do this, starting with a work group in 2017 that explored a lot of what was being done in other states, including Arizona, and ultimately recommended that Oregon come up with and develop a plan. That led to an implementation committee that met for approximately 2 years, and in April of 2022, that implementation committee delivered its final report and recommended draft rules for both admissions process and limitations on licensing, as well as rules of professional conduct for the paralegals. My Supreme Court approved a number of steps along the way, but in July 2022, we approved the final report as well as the rules. Those go live July 1, 2023, so coming right up. So what can paralegals do in Oregon if they're licensed? They will have to be specifically licensed in either the area of family law or landlord-tenant, or both. And within those areas, the practice rules identify specific categories of cases and specific actions that paralegals can and can't take. Probably the main dividing line is that licensed paralegals in our state will not be able to appear on behalf of a client in court, but they can assist clients with a wide variety of other tasks like completing forms, drafting documents, filing documents, and in court advising their clients as the clients represent themselves. Ensuring competency for all of our licensees was a top priority for the bar and the court. So we have a minimum educational requirement, which is applicants must have one of 3 educational degrees, either an associate's degree in paralegal studies, a bachelor's degree in any field, or a JD or LLB. But there's also a waiver process for what we call highly experienced paralegals, meaning generally somebody who has 5 years of full-time substantial paralegal experience. In addition, there's essentially a CLE, 20 hours of a CLE type requirement before they are licensed. The applicants also must meet an experience requirement. We settled on 1,500 hours of substantive experience working as a paralegal under a supervising attorney within the 3 years prior to licensing. And there's an additional requirement that some of those hours be in the field, either of family law or landlord-tenant, depending on which area the person is seeking a license in. In addition, our applicants have to demonstrate competence in 3 different ways. One is a portfolio of work. One is a demonstration of the knowledge of rules of professional responsibility through either passing a course that the bar creates or taking a test. And then there was some concern that there at least ought to be a knowledge tested to ensure that they understand the scope of the limitations of what their practice is. And so there is an exam component just as to the scope of practice. We have a few additional safeguards for consumer protection. Just like lawyers in Oregon, our paralegals will have to maintain malpractice insurance, maintain lawyer trust accounts, and contribute to our client security fund. They also have to comply with the rules of professional conduct.
Well, thank you. One takeaway that I think is really important and heartening is that this effort was co-led by the bar, because we often hear and see that the bar can be a force for support and leadership or opposition, and it's great to see states in which they're leaders for support. Chief Justice Gilday, Minnesota is farther down the road in terms of your paraprofessional program. Can you tell us what you're seeing in Minnesota? What have you learned so far? What has success looked like? And in light of success, what have you done further?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having us here today. So in Minnesota, we're operating a 3-year pilot as a way of seeing if we can meet some of the unmet legal needs through the work of paraprofessionals. We're choosing to pilot what we already have in Minnesota, so we're not taking an approach where we have to build something new. So we set up this pilot. We started it in 2021, And under the pilot, paraprofessionals can represent clients and appear in court in 3 case types: landlord-tenant, on behalf of the tenant, in undisputed or less complex family law matters, and in orders for protection and harassment restraining order cases. Minnesota, well, we chose these 3 areas, not surprisingly, because as Chief Justice Flynn mentioned, these are the case types that are typically where clients appear without representation. Minnesota is unique among states that allow paraprofessionals to provide legal help to litigants, and that we require that the paraprofessional work under the supervision of a licensed attorney. This doesn't mean that the lawyer is, joined at the hip with the paraprofessional, but the attorney does need to be involved at the beginning in helping select cases, making sure the case is appropriate for paraprofessional assistance, and then, of course, be available for any questions that might arise. And the lawyer can be disciplined if things go awry with the work of the paraprofessional. We set up the program by court rule. The rule is modeled after our student practice rule. You can go to the judiciary's website and just put paraprofessional pilot in the search bar, and that'll take you to the landing page, and you can get all the details about the program. But essentially, we implemented the pilot through a standing committee. The standing committee has representation from the academic world. There are a couple of judges, a couple of attorneys, and a couple of paralegals on the standing committee. And so if you're a paraprofessional and you want to participate in the pilot, you apply to the standing committee. They assess your qualifications and see if you satisfy the requirements of the rule, and then put you on the roster and you can start doing the work. The standing committee is also monitoring the program and issuing interim reports to the Supreme Court, letting us know how it's going and making recommendations for tweaking of the rule as the pilot is underway. We got a report from the standing committee last year, and they recommended that we expand the cases where paraprofessionals can be involved. Initially, when we started the pilot, we said if the case, it's a family law case, but it has allegations of domestic violence, we can't have paraprofessionals involved. And initially, we didn't let paraprofessionals participate in orders for protection and harassment restraining order cases. The standing committee recommended that the court enlarge the pilot to allow paraprofessionals to participate in those case types. And after a public hearing, we agreed and we expanded the pilot to include those case types. But we required that the standing committee develop some additional training, working with advocates for victims of domestic violence, and the Bar Association put together training unique for those case types. So now paraprofessionals can participate in those case types as well, as long as they have undergone that mandatory training. So we're about 2 years into the pilot. What have we learned? We have so far 22 certified paraprofessionals. Through the end of calendar year 2022, paraprofessionals represented clients in 159 cases in Minnesota, and they divide roughly half and half landlord-tenant, half family law. The program has been most successful in terms of use among legal aid providers, and particularly outside the metropolitan area in Minnesota, where distances are larger and lawyers are fewer. We have seen some involvement among family law lawyers, but not as much as in the legal aid space. Our goal has been to make it as easy as possible to become a paraprofessional while maintaining high competency requirements. The more burdensome the process is, the less useful we think this intervention will be. Of course, this is a pilot, so we'll see next year how we land. We do think that a key success to the program is to find champions among lawyers who will sponsor and work with paraprofessionals. And continuing that conversation with attorneys, and Ron, you alluded to this a little bit, just getting their comfort level up and helping them understand that this isn't about taking work away from lawyers. We're not trying to get into their market share. These are cases where lawyers are not doing the work. And so we want to make sure that they understand that that's the view that the court is taking on this. In terms of success of the pilot, when it ends next spring, we'll be using 3 broad criteria. First, did it expand access to competent legal help? Is it a useful tool for helping otherwise self-represented litigants navigate the system and ensure that they have a chance to assert their rights? Second, did it improve the efficiency of the courts? And third, is this a model that is economically sustainable, both in the legal aid and in the private market spaces? Ultimately, this is about access to justice, and with a goal as fundamental as that, it seems to me that every effort to move the needle forward should be expanded and examined.
Thanks so much. And I'm interested in your comment that legal aid programs are taking advantage of this. And from my perspective, and talking to executive directors as I do all the time, the ability of a legal aid program that, say, if we're lucky, gets an additional $1 million from some funding source to alternatively hire 10 lawyers, or maybe 5 lawyers and 15 paraprofessionals, or maybe 20 paraprofessionals. That's an empowering tool, and a tool that's going to serve the public, I believe. So thank you for that insight. Chief Justice Rush, you bring to us not only your perspective from Indiana, but as president of the Conference of Chief Justices, a national perspective. What are you hearing from that perspective from your colleagues, both about the potential of these sorts of alternative provider programs and any potential drawbacks?
Sure, thank you, Ron. I want to add to the chorus. Thank you for having us, the Chief Justices, here. We just met. We had a convening of Chief Justices throughout the United States and territories, and this was the topic we just talked about, so it's that important. Under our constitutions, we're responsible for the admission and discipline of lawyers. We have cases in the unauthorized practice of law. The realities are we don't have enough attorneys to provide the help to the 92% of people that either have less than a full attorney or an attorney to help them in a civil legal aid need. 98% of the cases in the country in the state courts, I always tell people from that work in the legislative branch, please come to court. As Chief Justice, I pop in courts all over the state. I popped in eviction court, 250 cases, one morning of eviction. Not one of those people were represented by an attorney. And since we're all attorneys here, remember, warranty of habitability, right? I mean, there's all kinds of defenses. As Chief Justice, I wanted to get up and represent all of them. And you think about that. What's more traumatic to a family than being evicted? And we happen to have 200, and I'm glad to see some of the corporate partners here, because the Conference of Chief Justices National Center for State Courts have gotten some large grants from corporate partners to help us with this funding need to put in Indiana. We put navigators. They're not legal navigators, they're navigators. So they're dealing with the social needs. How do you get the person linked up to services right from court? We're going to have an attorney shortage. If you don't have one in your community, you will, particularly in rural. It's sort of the graying of the profession. I've been to several talks about this. The numbers are real. We don't have enough attorneys, particularly in rural communities. The Marion County Public Defender Office has 40 openings. Most of us, Megan, I'm not going to put you in there, but the rest of us up here, I think, are boomers. And we're sort of the group that's graying out. And where are we going to have the lawyers to do it? So we have to look at these. We have to look at this. This is coming. But we want to make sure that we do it in a way that we keep consumer protection. When you look at who's coming to court and what you see, the mental health needs, the substance abuse needs of people, so they not only bring their case to court, they also bring some complex issues. And how do they navigate a complex legal system when they've already got those challenges? I was sitting out in the hallway at a court recently, and I was talking to a woman. I said, "Are you a party in that case?" She goes, "Oh, honey, that ain't no party in there." So just the lingo of what we talk about, so people, so they can navigate and understand what's going on. And it's not just poverty, it's really climbing up that ladder. There's a lot of middle class individuals that don't have access, or not able, and small businesses that don't have access. So I think to increase and using this initiative, law school numbers are down. In Indiana, we're 42 out of 50 with regard to number of lawyers, and it's almost like Moneyball, because we can track different communities that we will not even have some attorneys to represent individuals in the future. And we're all talking about it. We talked about this among the Chief Justices, what are some of the solutions that we have. So I think the promise of looking at regulatory reform for the profession is going to help. And I'm really encouraged, and I actually compiled something on every state that has it to see if they're getting consumer complaints, and I sent it, and I don't, Ron, if you can post it on the Legal Service website. We're not seeing consumer complaints come up from there, so I think doing it and doing it right and unfolding it is going to be key. And I do agree with Chief Justice Gilday. I think there's going to be a real role with regard to legal services and legal aid entities for partnering with these paralegals, because you don't have enough people with regard to the cases. If you're turning away at least half the cases, if you have some of these paraprofessionals, what can they do? And how can we as Chief Justices partner with you on getting that done? Because it really isn't self-represented. I think it's unrepresented. Nathan, you're completely correct. You know, what's our currency? It's public trust. And if people don't trust the system because they don't understand it, they don't have access. And a lot of people have an unmet civil legal aid need that they don't even know, and that's the need that's keeping them on the streets. That's keeping them from getting their children, getting papers so their grandchildren can get into school, and looking at the expungements and different licensing. So there's a lot of work to be done. You had asked me the promises and perils. The perils really are looking at patchwork funding for these programs. We have a hard time. I'm going before my legislature right now. I'm asking to double my civil legal aid budget. This is my fourth time asking. I have not gotten it yet. I feel good about this year, so I want you all to be thinking about me. I should know that in the next couple of weeks, because I think that's important. We need to have data. So what we need to be thinking about from the Conference of Chief Justice and National Center for State Courts, so we can collect the data so we can make better decisions. If it's working, let's look at your numbers. You said 159. What areas does it work best in? And even if you don't have a formal program, a lot of us are putting navigators in courts that are not legal navigators. They're navigators with regard to people struggling with behavioral health issues to get help. And I really need to work with the Bar Association and to make sure that they don't feel that this is a threat to their livelihood. Because I think the need is generally out there, and you're going to be hearing more and more about lawyer shortages around the country, because all the states that I talk to, would you all agree, particularly in your rural communities, you can't field it, which is going to put more pressure on it.
Thank you. Yeah, and we do hear a lot about consumer protection, and of course, the question is always compared to what, and compared to what in 90% or more of the cases, and particularly in rural areas and elsewhere, the what is no representation. But Chief Justice Gilday, if you could take like 2 minutes and talk about the protections you have in your program and the training requirements that serve to protect the public.
Yeah, this is a serious concern for us, and making sure that paraprofessionals are providing competent and useful advice is the whole point. We require lawyer supervision, as I mentioned, and we believe that the relationship between the lawyer and the paraprofessional on a case-by-case basis is key to consumer protection. Our standing committee does have the authority to accept consumer complaints and the power to remove paraprofessionals from the register. I feel like I should knock on wood or something, though. We don't have any complaints yet. In fact, the surveys that the standing committee has done of judges and attorneys and clients has been largely positive. We haven't set up a separate system for discipline. I mean, this is a pilot, and again, as I said earlier, we're trying to see if what we have in place already can meet some of the unmet needs rather than having to set up something new. And we do have the training and education requirements, although we've tried to balance the rigor with the practicality. We don't want the training requirements that are unnecessary and that will then deter participation. So you can qualify in Minnesota if you have an associate or bachelor's degree in paralegal studies, or if you have a paralegal certificate from an institutionally accredited school and a bachelor's or associate's degree in something else, a law degree, or 5 years of substantive paralegal experience. And then, as I mentioned, we added the training requirements for paraprofessionals who want to serve clients in orders for protection and harassment restraining orders due to the unique dynamics involved in cases of domestic or other abuse. And there are ethical requirements. Paraprofessionals have the same obligations as lawyers under the attorney-client privilege, and paraprofessionals must take a number of ethics and CLEs. And then there's the issue of insurance. The paraprofessional either has to be covered under the lawyer's malpractice insurance, or they need their own liability. So those are some of the steps we've taken in Minnesota.
Chief Justice Flynn, again, if you could take 2 minutes, let's take a slightly different question. You've gone through this relatively recently. What advice would you give to other states that are thinking about these issues before their states embark on the path that you've been taking the last several years?
Well, our approach in Oregon, which seems to have paid off, is a robust process to solicit and evaluate input from wide swath, members of the bar, members of the public. Outreach included several surveys, which sought input from paralegals, from students in paralegal programs, from judges, attorneys, the public at large. The implementation committee also looked at feedback from local bar associations, specialty and affinity bars in Oregon. And then the bar also engaged a consultant to reach into communities that are most likely to be served by these licensed paralegals. They connected surveys and focus groups to get a better understanding of what the public wants, what they need, what they're fearful of. And then the consultant prepared a report that we used. It showed 97% of members of the public favored implementation of this program. In our broader study, in our broader surveys, we had 1,000 discrete responses. Majority of the responses were actually favorable, although there significant concerns particularly came from lawyers. And then all of the concerns were brought to the attention of the work group for consideration. And the work group actually addressed some of the concerns by making changes to the initial proposals. One of those was a concern about consumer protection, that initially there was no exam requirement at all, out of an understandable awareness that that kind of single time exam can be challenging for some people. But that was a concern, and this way we added the exam requirement that focuses on scope of practice. Basically, the senior judge who chaired our implementation committee told me that she thinks it was very important that the process involved both those who are supportive as well as those who were skeptical. And we were fortunate in Oregon to have a variety of stakeholders willing to weigh in.
Thank you. That 97% figure is impressive. I'm not sure ice cream could get 97%, so that's pretty good. Chief Justice Hack, the Texas Access to Justice Commission's work group on access to legal services for low-income Texans held its kickoff meeting in January. Could you just take a couple minutes and talk about what approaches might be considered to address the needs of self-represented litigants in Texas?
Sure. 97% in Oregon. I think Arizona took a poll. It was only 80%. So there's some hard people in Arizona. But it's our initiative convened a couple of months ago, several months ago. Harriet Myers, who you'll hear from in a minute, is helping oversee all of that for our Access to Justice Commission. We're in the fantastic position of learning from two people who have been very successful already, two states that have been very successful, and others that are working on it. So we're going to follow in that on that path and try to be as effective as we can in achieving the same things that they are.
Thank you. Chief Justice Rush, last thoughts, and this is a tough question because we've taken the entirety of our program to talk about so-called regulatory reform, but the courts, like all of us, have gone through COVID and have learned a lot, and hopefully have taken are taking those lessons to heart and applying them. So. What other operational changes can the courts pursue to make it easier for people, especially those living in poverty, to resolve their problems and build trust in our court system?
We're building a lot of states are doing online dispute resolution. You think about like Amazon or PayPal doing it, so you can do it on your phone, allowing remote hearings when the parties are in agreement and it's not because you don't have to miss work or get points. Scheduling text message reminders, we're seeing better show-up rates, self-help centers, kiosks, not just in courthouses, but in the dollar stores in the community, places that don't have, that don't close at 5 o'clock. We're going to put kiosks in every county in Indiana. Having the websites that are workable. The court's triaging cases, so cases that don't require a lot of judicial resources can get moved quickly, which can help all the cases go through because there is a tremendous backlog still pending past COVID. To do annual training for judges on these, on topics like civility, culture, humility. Procedural due process does a lot for access to justice. When you look at what people care about, they care about being treated fairly. We've got to train our judges. It also has a lot of things for looking at diversity, equity, inclusion with regard to how we're training our judges, bringing the whole community in, not just from the county council, county commissioners, mental health providers, and using your superpowers as a judge. Because when judges invite people to show up at a meeting, they tend to show. So I would say use it for good, not evil. Bring your communities together and say, we've got an issue with regard to unmet civil legal aid needs. 80% of people living below poverty have at least one unmet civil legal aid. Think of what that can do for flipping it. So we're constantly looking, we're constantly open to ideas. We've done a lot of convenings on mental health, substance abuse, excessive fees and fines. We've worked with legal services. There's a lot of work to be done, but we've got to work with the bar. We've got to work within our larger communities, not just the judiciary with regard to getting these changes.
The justice gap, 92%, we keep talking about it, is obviously daunting. And to make a material dent in it, much less to bridge the gap completely, is going to take enormous leadership. We are lucky today to have 4 great judicial leaders, great in their remarks today, but more importantly, in their leadership in their states and across the country. Please join me in thanking them. It is now my honor and pleasure, and I am excited to introduce our next speaker, ABA President Deborah Enix Ross. In addition to her service at the ABA, Deborah is a senior advisor to the International Dispute Resolution Group of Debevoise and Plimpton, and previously she served as senior legal officer with the World Intellectual Property Organization Arbitration and Mediation Center in Geneva, Switzerland. Deborah has a long history of service. I'll just mention a couple of those posts. She served as chair of the ABA's Policymaking House of Delegates and as chair of the ABA Center for Human Rights. As chair of the ABA International Law Section, she co-founded the Women's Interest Network and worked with the International Bar Association to create its Women's Interest Group. Most notably, and to my mind, the most significant credential in her very impressive resume is she started her career as a legal aid lawyer, and she has lived up to that start in her year as ABA president, for which we're very grateful, and we're grateful for you to be here today, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. So I have to confess that I don't know what was more intimidating when I spoke before the Conference of Chief Justices or to follow a panel of Chief Justices. So maybe I'm destined to just keep following you all, and that would be an honor indeed. Thank you, all of you, for turning out today. I know that legal services is something that is very important and very special to all of us. I know from the ABA, access to justice is a fundamental focus of the American Bar Association. It is a major element of our commitment in our long-standing partnership with the Legal Services Corporation. And the ABA is proud to collaborate with equal justice advocates and providers, including the Legal Services Corporation, corporate and law firm pro bono initiatives, leaders of the judiciary, lawmakers, state and local bar associations, and more. In 1974, the ABA was a prominent and integral supporter when Congress created the Legal Services Corporation. And ever since, legal aid funding has been a nonpartisan, unifying issue of critical importance to the ABA and the legal profession's core value of equal justice under the law. And I am here in Washington this week with an army of over 165 lawyers from 35 states and counting who came here on an important mission. Our priority at this annual event known as ABA Day, and only the ABA could have 3 days of advocacy and call it ABA Day, but can't fix everything. But during ABA Day, we will be here to underscore to members of Congress the need for robust funding for the Legal Services Corporation. And this is the first time that we're meeting in person since the pandemic, but even during COVID, we conducted ABA Day online with great participation and success. So our advocacy year after year delivers our message loud and clear that legal aid helps keep our justice system functioning. We emphasize that the federal government has an important responsibility to meet our constitutional promise to establish justice. And we note that legal aid supports constituent services back home for veterans, seniors, rural Americans, domestic violence survivors, disaster victims, and more. And as has been noted, for me, this is especially important because I did begin my career as a legal aid lawyer in Manhattan. And that is why I've made it a priority to visit legal aid offices wherever I go, to thank them for their valuable service and to thank them for being the ones who really are on the front lines of providing access to justice. And I was particularly interested in the panel and talking about how we can use paralegals because I owe a lot to legal services, not only a career that I could not imagine, but a husband as well. I met my husband in legal services. Now, I'm not saying that that's a selling point for legal services, but I am saying it could happen. But seriously, I want to really emphasize how important it is for us to stand together, continue to stand united in support of legal services, and to let you know that you have a strong, steadfast ally in the ABA. Thank you for the outstanding work and advocacy that you are doing, have done, and will continue to do to make sure that we live up to the promise of equal justice under law. Thank you very much.
My name's Julie Riskin, and I serve on the LSC Board of Directors. And it's my incredible honor to introduce our next speaker, Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Cardin is a proud and dedicated Marylander with a prolific history of public service. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006. He currently serves as the chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee and the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and he's a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations, Finance, Environment, and Public Works Committees. He has been an advocate for LSC funding and has chaired a Judiciary Committee on closing the justice gap in 2008, and he is a co-lead of the Senate Dear Colleague letter. We are honored to have you with us today, Senator Cardin.
Julie, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. It's really great to see you all in person. Believe me, you look good. It is great to have you here. We need you here. So thank you for your personal commitment to equal justice under the law and to the values that make this nation the great nation it is. It's being tested today. So your lobbying here on behalf of Equal Justice, on behalf of the Legal Services Corporation, is so desperately needed. But I want to go back for the last 2 years, because I think we've had a tremendous amount of legislative action during the last 2 years to deal with equity issues. We've seen the passage of the American Rescue Plan that dealt with the COVID pandemic, providing resources in traditionally underserved communities, providing help for state and local governments so that they could continue essential services in which the most vulnerable people were the most impacted as a result of the COVID pandemic. We then passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill that had a strong social justice equity feature to it. It provided for removing lead in our pipes, which primarily most affects the underserved communities. We had reconnecting communities that had been divided because of irresponsible transportation programs. Again, the underserved communities were the most impacted by that. The expansion of broadband, and we knew before COVID-19, but after COVID-19 it became very apparent that we have to have access to affordable quality, high-speed internet in order to have justice in our community. We passed the Safer Communities Act. Today is particularly important to talk about that with the violence we saw in our schools, to deal with behavioral health in our schools and to enact sensible gun safety legislation. We need to do more. It's well past time that we ban assault weapons, private ownership in this country. So we have a lot more that we need to do in that regard. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act that dealt with fairness in healthcare cost, making available insulin $35 a month. Again, who was the most impacted? Those that could least afford it, had diabetes. And we were able to give now no-cost vaccines, which I hope you all will get the message out about shingle shots and to make sure that people take advantage of what we had in the bill. And we made the largest investment ever in climate. And I mention that because here in the United States and around the world, it is the underserved communities, it's the low-income communities, it's our vulnerable people that are most affected by climate change. So in every one of these cases, there was a social justice component. I chaired a small business committee, and we've been singularly focused on expanding small business entrepreneurship opportunities to traditionally underserved communities. I was with the president a little bit earlier today in regards to his announcements concerning women businesses in our country and the great growth we saw last year and his increasing the number of women's business centers in our community. So we've been focused on providing justice over the last 2 years. But we have to recognize that we have a significant hurdle in regards to equal justice under the law. I'm a lawyer, and I believe that I have a special responsibility. As the guardians of our legal system, the legal profession has a responsibility to make sure that we do have equal access to justice in this country. So a few years ago, when I was in the House of Representatives, I chaired the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. It gave me an opportunity to see firsthand the services that we are providing in our community. I led a study similar to the one that you just reported on the gaps on providing legal services. And we found at that time, this was during the late 80s, early 90s, that in Maryland, we had a significant gap on the people who needed legal services and were able to get civil legal services. And it made a huge difference. The outcome of their experience with our legal system was very much dependent upon having adequate legal representation. That's things that I think you all know. But when we have such a gap and such a difference, we don't have equal justice under the law. So we did some things to try to change that. We tried to institute pro bono, that all lawyers have a responsibility to handle pro bono cases, and we report on that every year in our state of Maryland. I was very proud of that recommendation. But perhaps the recommendation I am the most proud was the institution in Maryland, law schools, where every law student had exposure to clinical experience, handling poverty cases as law students. And Maryland's clinical law programs are now well known nationally as one of the strongest programs we have in this country. Lawyers have a responsibility. We have to do more. But government has a responsibility as well. And that's where we have not lived up to our commitment. The funding for the Legal Services Corporation has not kept up anywhere near the needs, haven't even held its own over a long period of time. We need to do better. So I am authoring a letter with my colleagues to the appropriators to provide robust funding for the Legal Services Corporation. It's critically important. We're going to do our share in Maryland as lawyers. We need to do more. I would urge all of us to do more. We have incredible organizations that are out there to help in regards to our women's law centers and the disability law centers that we have. They're all critically important and get funding through our collective efforts. So you're here because you care. And if you're lawyers, you have, I think, a fiduciary responsibility to help our challenged system do much better than it's doing today. I am proud to be on your team, and I thank you for what you do to make our country a fairer country. Equal justice under the law needs to have a meaning. Recently in Maryland, we elected a new governor, Governor Wes Moore. His saying is, leave no one behind. We've left too many people behind in our legal system. It's time that we take major steps to correct that injustice. Your presence today makes that much more of a reality. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here today. I am particularly indebted to the corporate leadership that we have present here, and I'd like to take, in just a moment, a few minutes to introduce them to you. I am Harriet Myers, and I have the privilege of co-chairing the Leaders Council for Legal Services Corporation. And I will have to say that my co-chair, Kenneth Frazier, is someone who provides the perfect role model for me, as well as all of us who are active in trying to support legal services and its funding, because he is an amazing leader. And he couldn't be with us today, but he's always there helping us with this venture. So when you see Ken, tell him how much, first we missed him, but also how great a leader he is and what a role model he is for us. And the same thing goes for the gentleman that I'm seeing right this minute. John Levy has been such an amazing leader for us, and his creation of the Leaders Council has been such a shot in the arm, just what we need to get more than the lawyers involved in this activity, but corporate leaders and members of the community, John Grisham, people of that nature. So John, thank you for that. Now to the panel. It's a stellar group. We really have a perfect threesome here. First, Ivan Fong is Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of Medtronics. And he is a member of the Leaders Council, and he has held roles in the Justice Department and also the Department of Homeland Security. In other words, he's helped keep you safe. He has been a general counsel of 3 public companies, and he has served on the board of directors of Equal Justice Works, which I'm sure most of you know helps spread
the concepts of pro bono and access to justice around the nation. Second, Rena Rice is Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Marriott International. She's held several positions at Marriott for over 15 years. Before that, she led the legal officers at Hyatt Hotels and worked with their global leadership in that effort, closer to home. And this really tells you about her heart and where she is, and that is that she is on the board of trustees for the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia. Even though she is an incredible corporate leader with the responsibilities she has, she still serves on that board of trustees. She also joined with 160 other leaders in Congress to convey the great needs that we have in legal services funding and to provide the arguments in favor of our representatives and senators supporting legal aid funding. Now, John Schultz is also a leader in our legal services community and an executive vice president and chief operating officer of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He is also on our Leaders Council. John also is past chair of the Corporate Advisory Council for National Legal Aid and Defender Association. All of us are familiar with the work of that group. Starting in 2017, and now it's an annual tradition, John has inspired his peers, nearly 200 of them, to advocate for more federal funding for people who cannot afford legal services to the poor. So you can see why we wanted Ivan and Rena and John to be with us here today in this forum. They are tremendous, not just corporate leaders, really world leaders in terms of their responsibilities, but also stalwart leaders in legal services to the poor. So we want to begin. We're all here on Capitol Hill to talk about these issues, and so each of these individuals have taken time away from their incredible schedules to be here. And obviously the rule of law in a constitutional democracy and its support for legal services and access to justice has touched their hearts and minds, and they are here. We'd like to just take a few moments, and could each of you tell us what it was that was a defining moment or something that caused your interest in these issues? Ivan.
Start. Well, thank you, and thank you, Harriet and John and Legal Services Corporation for hosting this important discussion, not only to our country and to the legal community, but as you can see, to the business community as well. I would say I've had many defining moments when it comes to access to justice. I started working or volunteering for a legal aid clinic in law school, doing small claims court work in a law firm and in government, and now as an in-house lawyer, I've done death penalty cases, represented pro se litigants, done legal work for community-based nonprofits, staffed legal aid clinics, expungement clinics, wills clinics for seniors and veterans. I've done a lot of foster children representation in Minnesota. We have a great organization called the Children's Law Center. And I wanted to describe one matter that actually just surfaced last week. I got a call from the grandfather of three boys whom I had represented maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Their mother had left them homeless. She had had a number of substance abuse and other issues. She really could not take care of these children. At the time, they were something like 5 and 8 and 11. And so I worked with them, represented them, helped them get through the process of getting adopted by their grandfather, terminate the mother's parental rights. It was quite the journey, but we made it through. And I got a call last week from the grandfather just to say, you know, we were sitting around at dinner the other night, and one of the boys asked, so I wonder how Mr. Fong is doing. You know, he was so helpful, and, you know, we wouldn't be able to have this family dinner if it weren't for his work. And so he called and said, I just wanted to tell you that, Mr. Fong, that you really changed our lives. And, you know, gave me a rundown, and the boys, you know, playing basketball and playing in the band and going to church and singing in the church choir. And it's just, I said, I'm so glad to hear this, and I'm going to promise I'm going to come, and, you know, when the weather gets a little warmer in Minnesota, we'll go out and go out for a picnic and, you know, reconnect. So there have been many defining moments like that. It's just so rewarding.
It's a fabulous story of lives changed. So, yeah.
Thank you, Harriet. Well, thank you, Harriet, and thank you all for being here. Ivan, John, being here this afternoon. I'm not sure I have a story that can hold a candle to Ivan's. My involvement has been a little more minor, and I think you embellished on my service on legal aid. Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia is mostly known for the law firm members who are members of the board. And a friend of mine who is a local GC said to me, we need to get involved. We need the corporate community in DC, even though it's relatively small, to have a voice here. And I haven't been a member even for a full year yet, but it's been really interesting to see how people respond when you do approach them for things. I will make one comment about my hotel experience, which is if any of you have been to conferences in hotel ballrooms, this temperature will feel very, very familiar to you because we try to freeze everybody out. And my personal crusade on climate change is to get us to tick the temperature up a couple of degrees. So we hear you. My defining moment, I was really thinking about this, and I thought back to when I was a kid and sat with my dad, who was a lawyer, on the couch watching the Watergate hearings. And my father really took to heart the fact that our system was going to withstand an enormous threat. I don't think I understood really what was going on. But what I did understand was the passion with which he watched those hearings and then talked to my sister and to me and to other members of our family about the peril that the American system was in and how the lawyers were actually going to step up and help save it. My father died many years ago. I often think that had he been alive over the past decade, he would have been beside himself over what is going on in this country. But I do think that that core of commitment to what this system stands for and what this country stands for and what the lawyers in this country stand for is something that I hold with me forever. And I think the other thing that always occurs to me, and many of us have pieces of artwork in our offices, whether our home offices or our real offices, with the biblical injunction, justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. And I think, again, that is really core to why all of us are here today.
Fabulous. John.
Well, it's great to see everyone, and thank you for being here. I was reflecting on maybe the last time I was able to attend in person, and we did an event at the White House, and I saw so many familiar faces, folks who've been, carrying the water for such a long time. It's also great to see so many new faces as we continue on this journey. Also, a huge thanks to John Levy. Like John Grisham, I have found it incredibly difficult to say no to John, but more importantly, Congress has found it hard to say no to John Levy, and I think we are all better off for that. So I'm here in no small part to a very formative experience as a law student, and it was really the impact of one woman in that regard. I was in the juvenile law clinic at the University of Pennsylvania, and I had the opportunity to work with a brilliant and courageous woman by the name of Lori McKinley, who was then a member of the faculty for that specific clinic and then went on to work in community legal services in Philadelphia. And she had agreed to become the guardian ad litem for an intellectually challenged woman who was living in a community setting and whose mother had petitioned the court to have her sterilized. The mother, all well-intended for specific health reasons and the like, saw the need to do so, but I think many of us know the history that has existed in that community with forced sterilization. I can tell you that I witnessed firsthand some of the blowback, including press articles that ran that were not particularly flattering of Lori and her work, and was clearly sympathetic to her mother. And Lori, without compensation and unflinchingly for 7 years, represented Cynthia in that matter. I had the opportunity to work on it for a couple years before sort of moving forward, but remained in contact and following it. It left an indelible print on me in terms of the willingness to take on very difficult subjects for the most vulnerable members of the community when it's not particularly popular to do so, and the easy thing to do was simply to let it go. And Lori did an amazing job advocating for Cynthia and for a community that, historically wasn't the subject of advocacy. And I was just so impressed and moved by that that stuck with me. And I was particularly pleased to be able to honor Lori a few years ago when I was being honored, and have her with me at the dinner and be able to tell her story, because those are the kinds of folks that inspire that next generation of leaders. She certainly inspired me, and I hope what we do here today continues to inspire that next group of leaders to do the kinds of things that will close this justice gap.
Right. And as I mentioned, Rena, during the introductions and your participation in this letter writing campaign to the Congress, obviously you're very serious about participating, increasing access to justice, and you've been a senior leader now at Marriott for many years, and as we mentioned, Hyatt before that, but could you tell us how is it that you instill the same passion that you have in your colleagues, and how is it that you create a culture that you hope will last even after you have moved on?
So I'm really proud to say it's really not about me, it's about my team. People are involved in a whole variety of organizations that they believe in and that really touch their hearts. I'm also really proud to say that one of the things that we've always looked to do is to involve all members of the department, attorneys and non-attorneys. So I was really fascinated to hear the conversation before about how people in a legal department, whether or not they are attorneys, can participate in pro bono activities and community activities. Our department has always stood by two of our company's core values. Those two are serve our world and act with integrity. We've always participated, I would say in a fairly modest way, in pro bono activities, and it was as if something lit a match when George Floyd was murdered in 2020. I think all of a sudden, and we were in the midst of perhaps the worst downturn our industry had ever experienced. And that's when we really relaunched our pro bono program. We watched our department, along with the entire industry and all departments in the company, lose people, even as work volumes increased, and it didn't matter. People said, we need to stand up, we need to talk to each other, we need to band together and to figure out how we support our communities. And the other thing that I love is it's not only in the US that we're doing this. We have teams in Europe, we have teams in Asia, we have teams who support the Caribbean and Latin America, and everybody is finding things that really speak to them. So in the US, we've done work with Welcome.us to help resettle Afghan refugees. We've worked on the Expungement Project. We've worked on the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project. Over in our CALA team, Caribbean Latin America, has been working with the Cuban American Bar Association to assist unaccompanied minors who come into the country. Our teams in Asia have worked to analyze the juvenile justice systems in the various countries where they are, to decide, to really analyze whether those systems are compliant with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So fundamentally, it is about Marriott's commitment to serve our world, whether it's training hundreds of thousands of associates to recognize the signs of human trafficking and to know what to do about it, or to have the company support the efforts of the lawyers and all of our staff in the law department. The other thing that I think is really great about the corporate efforts that we've had is that we've partnered with our outside counsel. We really could not do this on our own, and it has been an incredible journey with some of our most valued external counsel partners to be part of this with them, and we're really grateful because they've made it possible for us to do this work.
Thank you so much, and I will have to say that we could have a whole seminar on that topic of involving the partnerships that exist between corporations and outside counsel. So thank you for mentioning that. And Ivan, I am aware that Medtronic views its duty to its employees to cause them to be involved in their communities, to do things that are meaningful. Obviously, the assumption is all of their work for the company is important, but also important is being good citizens and going beyond just their work. So what we'd like to ask you is, how do you give your lawyers the confidence that to handle matters that are different from what they would day to day? We know what corporate lawyers handle. They generally don't handle family law or landlord-tenant, as we've been discussing. So what do you say to your lawyers to encourage them to handle matters that are outside their usual expertise?
Usually those questions are a cause for celebration because they've already indicated that they are interested in doing pro bono, and so it's just a matter of how. And so before I answer the question, I thought I would take a moment to talk about the why. This is the theme, I think, of today's conference, which is why is this topic so important? And as been said before, I think the data show, and you heard about the Legal Services Corporation Justice Gap Study, the ABA research that's been done. I mean, the bottom line is our current system of justice, civil and criminal, fails low-income people and families in our country. And so when I talk to our lawyers and our other legal professionals, I talk about the obligation and the privilege that we have to, or the privilege of practicing law that comes with the responsibility to provide pro bono services. It's part of our license to practice law. I talk about the need for pro bono legal services. I talk about how rewarding and how much they can learn from the experience. But then I close really with this appeal to why the corporate community cares. And it's really because of the need to uphold the rule of law. You know, when people don't have access to justice or even perceive they can't get a fair shake in our court system, that erodes our commitment to equal justice under the law and to the rule of law. You know, and the consequence of this failure of the justice chasm, as has been mentioned, is that it risks causing people to lose faith in our democratic system and our system of justice. And business really relies upon having a stable social system where people do perceive there to be fairness and that it's well functioning. Faith in our system is essential to the rule of law, because if people don't get a sense that there's a level playing field, either because they're poor or because they're a person of color, that risks one of the bedrock foundations of our democracy. The same rules should apply to both the powerful and the powerless. No one in this country should be denied access to our courts simply because they can't afford a lawyer. So then once I get them excited about doing this work, the answer is there are so many resources available to help in-house lawyers who want to do pro bono, starting with pro bono work in their area of expertise. So we have, employment lawyers, we have tax and transactional lawyers, we have intellectual property lawyers, we have litigators. In almost all of these areas, there are pro bono programs set up to help lawyers match with clients who have needs in those areas. Secondly, I say, if you need specialized training, there's usually training to be had. We sponsor numerous lunchtime seminars. We work closely in partnership with the local legal aid groups and other pro bono providers. And so we will do training on whatever it is, wills, basic immigration law, landlord-tenant law, so people can learn. And the third thing I say is you know more than you think. I have staffed many legal clinics where I think I'd say 90% of what I do, a client comes in, they have something that they got in the mail, they don't understand what it says. It may be from the Social Security Administration, it may be from their landlord, and just reading the letter or talking to them to figure out what it is that's sort of going on in their life, and making a phone call, writing a letter, sometimes just telling the client, this is what you need to do to go through this process. It demystifies, what for a lot of people is just a labyrinth, right? It's a maze, and lawyers sort of are good at reading the process. You can go online and figure out what you're supposed to do to get to what it is that the person needs to get. So I tell them, look, you can get the training, you can work in your area of expertise, or we will help you. You'll be with somebody who knows what they're doing, and you'll learn, and it's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. In fact, I wish I could have had a number of law firm leaders, and I have some here, I know, but every law firm leader should hear that speech, because it was great in terms of encouraging lawyers who may have that hesitancy to step outside their comfort zone. So thank you very much for that. And John, I know Hewlett-Packard also maintains a deep community commitment and encourages pro bono work also. And how do you, as the general counsel, go about creating a culture conducive to those activities?
Well, I think my colleagues hit a lot of the high points, and as a company with a long-standing focus on advancing the way people live and work, going back to Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, fortunately operate in an environment where, I think at the top the culture has been, established for a long time. And we certainly do have had a long-running pro bono program, lots of interaction outside the U.S. About 90% of my team is non-lawyers at this point. More than 50% are outside the country. And so whether it's on legal issues or advocacy around stopping modern slavery in the technology and other industries, responsible supply chain, et cetera, I think there's a tremendous amount of advocacy and activism. In some ways, not having grown up in the 60s, but having obviously grown up close enough to have read, heard, and interacted with a lot of people for whom the 60s were a formative year. I do feel like right now we live in a period in which our folks are generally activated. And I don't feel as though the problem is people are apathetic and they don't want to get into the game. I do think that the challenges of everything else that's happening in their lives today, including things that are still cascading from the pandemic, is the overwhelming factor in whether we can get the level of commitment and folks feel like they can devote the time they need to devote. And so we've been talking about, in our organization, what we call living the good life, and that's really living with purpose and living in harmony, and finding the time to make sure that you are focused on what it means to live with purpose, and that you're living in harmony, not just inside of the business context, but across everything that is important to you. And that means not just creating the tools and opportunities for pro bono work or for advocacy work, but really making it clear to people this may be part of you living with purpose and harmony and really being kind of the full you. Being able to bring your full self to work means being able to find the time to do this type of work and us creating that space. Not just telling you there's an opportunity, not just giving you credit for it, but creating that space so it becomes part of the balance of what you do. That's challenging right now with all of the other things that are happening in people's lives. It's challenging given all of the pressures in corporate America. But I do think it's critical to the long-term success of our organizations, and I think it's really critical to the long-term success of our team members. And so that's what is driving our culture right now to try to take advantage of this period of activism.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to move right along here because we have a next speaker behind us. And Rena, I know you all are really good about getting feedback from people who stay at your hotels, and that's important feedback. And we've never done that sort of thing with respect to legal services organizations where you go in and talk to the clients that are seeking help in either getting it or not getting it. What would you like to learn from an exercise like that if we could do it, though? What would you be able to
So I
learn?
think it's great to equate it to what we do in our businesses, which is we seek out user feedback and we go through that iteration process to try to figure out what we can do better and how we can continually improve. Are there gaps that we need to pay attention to? What are we doing well that we should double down on? And what challenges do we have? I think some of it is storytelling, too. And when we talk about legal aid clients, I think what legal aid does really, really well is bring it down to individual people that we are serving. I think one of the things, if you sort of take a step back and look at the enormity of some of the challenges that we face, it's very daunting. It's easy to throw up your hands and to say, oh my God, how do we even go about solving this? But if you look at what we can do, every journey starts with one step. We serve one person. We really expand from that. There's also a degree of, I don't know that pleasure is the right word, but satisfaction and reinvigoration for each of us, and I think that's important. And I think, to help one person, again, I'll go back to a proverb, is really to impact one person's life, I'll paraphrase a little, is really to impact the entire world. You have to start someplace. So I think that's what legal aid and other organizations can really do well.
Right. And Ivan, your company is great about innovation, and what we'd like to ask you is just what is it that enables that at your company? And it's pretty clear you put a real emphasis on putting people first. And so could you share with us what can staff and volunteers from legal aid organizations learn from the practice of putting the human factor at the center of everything?
It's a critical question. Thank you, Harriet. So I recently finished my first year at Medtronic, and I have an internal blog that I write. And so I wrote about my learnings in my first year. And one of the things I talked about was never underestimate the power of a compelling mission. You know, I've been at many mission-oriented companies, even at the Department of Homeland Security, where I asked people, why did you come to DHS? And most, actually, lawyers said, you know, after 9/11, I wanted to do something to serve my country. At Medtronic, you know, this idea of a mission really permeates. I mean, it's a real thing. The tenet number one, which people talk about and used in decisions at the company, is to contribute to human welfare by application of biomedical engineering in the research, design, manufacture, and sale of instruments or appliances that alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And that's very motivating for everybody in our legal organization. In addition, and people actually do refer to these by tenet number, tenet 6 talks about the importance of maintaining good citizenship in our company, in our community. So the point is, having a really powerful mission, to John's earlier point about people's need for an attraction to purpose. Purpose-driven is really, I think, what I would say to the legal services staff, to wrap your people and culture around the client at the other end of everything you do. So at Medtronic, we talk about the patient who is at the other end of every decision we make. It's great for recruiting and retaining talent. As Rena said, we do a lot of storytelling. You talk about the patients who've, you know, overcome significant health issues as a result of the Medtronic therapy. You know, you ask yourself, can your team quote your mission? Do you quote it in meetings? Are there certain values that reflect your culture and help drive decision-making? People need to see the impact of what they do beyond the four walls of your organization. They need to be seen and appreciated for what they do. And they need to have a voice in how work gets done, and they need to be able to grow in their careers. So talent development is an important part of making sure that your organization just has a strong culture, not only mission-oriented, but takes care of the talent that you have.
And many people may not know that Medtronic also makes sticky notes. And so
that's 3M.
That's
the old
most prior life.
In his former life.
Yep.
But thank you.
It would be great if every time we think of a sticky note, we think of what we can do for access to justice. But John, you get the last question, and it's we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary next year of Legal Services Corporation, and what do you see as we approach that anniversary of what can be done? What is the connection between business, rule of law, and civil justice? That would be a good end for our panel.
Well, I think if, you know, the rule of law has been central to the prosperity of this country, and, you know, my personal experience being part of a corporation that does business in almost every country in the world is that the rule of law has been a competitive advantage for us. And so the connection between business and the rule of law is direct and clear. And if you have any doubts about that, think about how many lobbyists you see in Capitol Hill and in the state capitals around the United States who are trying to influence the law and the regulatory environment. You know, unfortunately, that same support hasn't necessarily been there for access to justice, even though in my mind, the connection is just as direct and just as clear. If our communities or large portions of our community don't believe the system is fair, they think it's stacked against them, the consequences are dire. And we have seen countless of examples of that across the last few years. However, I think the solution here is not a legal solution. It involves not just business, but government leaders and influencers and media, and that is to stop thinking about this as a legal rights issue and think about it as a fundamental human rights issue. We need to treat access to justice the same way we have thought about the right to health care in this country. We took on the cause of the underinsured and the uninsured. We now need to take on the cause of the underrepresented and the unrepresented in the legal space. We will not solve this access to justice crisis without a comprehensive legislative solution. And therefore, I really valued and appreciated Senator Cardin's remarks, because I believe as we approach the 50th anniversary of LSC, and as inspiring as all of the things that we are doing as a community, as they are, I fear it is not enough. And so I think as we go into this 50th year, together, we have to become an even louder voice demanding at the federal and state level a legislative solution to the equal access to justice gap. We need to guarantee people the right to access to justice the same way we guarantee the right to health care. I think that needs to be where we put our focus, because otherwise I think we will just continue to see this crisis grow.
Thank you. And join me in thanking this incredible panel of corporate leaders.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Robert Gray. I'm a member of the board of LSC. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Chris Murphy. He's on a tight schedule, so he said, don't worry about it. So I'm not going to worry about it and just tell you that he has represented the great state of Connecticut in both houses and been in the Senate since 2013 and is one of the most important leaders on the Dear Colleague letter. And I want to thank him for always being there. And the only team I have left in my bracket is the University of Connecticut. So good luck.
Well done. Well done. Thank you, man. All right. Go Huskies. We're very excited in Connecticut. We're going to be paying close attention. We wish our women were still in the fight, but we're grateful to have this huge turnout today for LSC. Thank you for all the work you do on behalf of legal aid. I come from a legal aid family. My wife, Kathy, who now practices down here in DC for a very long time, led the Children at Risk unit for Connecticut Legal Services, which is our statewide legal aid unit. She started out as a staff attorney, worked her way up to lead the unit representing kids in education disputes and juvenile justice disputes. And I'm so proud of the work that she did. I've been able to see firsthand both the fantastic work that legal aid and legal services lawyers do, but the absolute tsunami of need that is overwhelming those offices and those lawyers. And we both still keep in touch very closely with that community back in Connecticut. As was mentioned, for a while I've led the effort to try to push my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to put the requisite amount of funds in the budget to at least help stem that tidal wave of need that's happening out there. And we will continue in a bipartisan way to try to push our colleagues. I'm grateful to have Senator Cornyn's support, Senator Sullivan from Alaska's support. But Senator Cornyn and I have also worked on a piece of legislation that we think is really important, and I know that this is on your agenda as well. We're introducing once again this year the Office of Access to Justice bill, and this is an office that is not statutorily authorized inside the administration, that makes sure there's one central clearinghouse to stand up for individuals' right to get access to counsel. And this was an office that existed under the Obama administration. The Trump administration got rid of it. The Biden administration put it back in place. You really can't run an effective outreach operation to legal services groups. You can't run effective advocacy on behalf of individuals who deserve access to justice if the office is appearing and reappearing and disappearing depending on which president is in office. And so on a bipartisan basis, we are going to try to put this into law to make sure that we've got somebody standing up for these folks every day. And I am being very short because we're in the middle of a vote right now on the floor of the Senate, and so I have to make sure I get back up before it hits zeros. But let me just offer this one additional thought to you. So listen, as I said, I've lived the legal aid experience. I lead the letter every year pushing for more funding. I'm leading the legislation trying to make permanent this capacity to stand up for people's right to access justice. So I don't know that there's anybody in the Senate that's sort of working harder on this set of issues. But let me just level with you. In the healthcare world, we have a phrase, comorbidities, right? People that have a variety of different illnesses that compound each other. And they become very difficult to care for when they have a layering of illnesses. Well, the same thing is happening in our legal justice system today. The folks that I live with in the south end of Hartford, and we live in a low-income neighborhood just south of downtown in Hartford, those folks don't have a housing legal issue, right? They have a housing legal issue, and they have a healthcare legal issue, and they have an environmental justice legal issue, right? They've got a layering of rights that are being unaddressed because of a decision that this country has made to layer poverty on top of lack of access to housing, on top of bad schools, on top of threats to physical safety if you live in certain neighborhoods in this country. And so I am all for trying to make sure that they have an opportunity to access their rights through the legal system. But they have so many legal issues because of our decision to essentially put them in survivalist mode, working full-time but not making enough to afford your rent, having your kids fear for their life every day when they walk out the street to school. That we've got to have a holistic approach to trying to better the lives of these families. And so my hope is that for those of you who are standing up for legal aid and legal services, that you're doing that because you're standing up for those folks who are in perilous situations all across our country, and that you will also join us in our fights to bring them a modicum of economic platform, a modicum of public safety, schools that they can be proud of. This has got to be a holistic fight on behalf of this population. There is a limit to what the legal system can do for them. That access to the legal system is transformational for somebody who is being kicked out of an apartment with 3 or 4 kids, a woman who's been denied access to an income because of a spouse who won't pay child support or alimony. All that stuff makes a difference on a case-by-case basis, but to systemically stand up for these families, we got to be thinking bigger and doing bigger. And so I'm so appreciative of your decision to lend your enormous moral authority to this cause on behalf of access to justice. I will continue to lead it. I will continue to lift up the stories of my wife's clients over the course of her decade of work, and I look forward to joining you in these bigger causes to make sure that these families and these people have what they need. So thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Murphy, for your remarks, for your leadership, for your passion. We are all benefited by it. Thank you to all of our speakers today. Your engaging and inspiring remarks are truly helpful to our cause. And thank you to all of you for being here. For those of you who are here for ABA Day, thank you for your support. Thank you to all of you for what you do in your day jobs and what you do in your spare time in support of legal aid. Hopefully, many of you, most of you, maybe even all of you are registered for our reception over at the Supreme Court. It's across the street. There's a sign above the door that says equal justice under law. You can't miss it, so we look forward to seeing you.